It's time to take your business to the next level, the boss level. These are the premier business owner strategies and successes being utilized by the industry's top talent today. Rock your business like a boss, a VO boss. Now let's welcome your host, Ganguzza.
Hey everyone, welcome to the VO Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Ganguzza, and I am here with the most amazing content marketing maven, Pamela Muldoon. Hey Pamela, how are you today?
Hello, Ann. I'm fantastic. How are you? It's good to hear your voice.
I'm doing good. I know. So, Pamela, we've had some great response from our past episodes talking about content marketing and buyer personas. And last episode, we started talking about creating a database and how to build that database. And so This week, I'd like to talk about how to actually communicate with that database and maybe start chatting a little bit about email and being able to communicate with the database that we've just built up. So,
fantastic. Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. So let's talk about, I guess, communication and email, which comes to mind first, of course. I think that that's just the logical next step once we have a database to really be able to communicate with the database that has now expressed interest in our content.
Yes. Your database is gold, right? That's your lifeline. So communicating to them, and email is not dead. It is absolutely not dead. It is still very alive and well. It's just how you do it, right? So there's got to be some solid intention, an understanding of the different ways that email can be used, and then, of course, what you want that email to actually do. So there's a lot to talk about.
I like that you said email is not dead, because I think some people might say or contest that, because how much email do we get on a daily basis and how much email do we open? And I know for my Boss Blast customers, we are always explaining open rates and, what to expect, because we all get email. And a lot of times we don't open that email. So I'm glad to hear you say that email's not dead.
Right.
I do believe that is probably still the first, foremost, best way to communicate with our database is through email. However, I don't think it's a reality to expect that 100% of the time people are going to open your email.
No, it's you still have to do the work, right? It's getting the database is one challenge, right? Now, actually keeping your database engaged is a whole other conversation. So it's not only is it not dead, it really is the way that you can communicate and, for lack of a better word, own your audience, right? So it doesn't mean that because you own the audience, i.e. the database, that they're just going to always stick around. You still have to give them solid, valuable information. And we can talk a little bit about different ways you can do that. But it's also really important when we think about kind of, what we call inbound marketing or outbound marketing. We have all these social platforms and ways to communicate, but we don't own those platforms. And those platforms can change or modify or edit at any time. So that is one of the reasons the email database or the database is so critical. And then, of course, just getting really smart and doing some of your own homework around email marketing.
This is true.
I think is a really smart move for folks that are in that, self-employed, independent, freelance, because it is really a great way to stay engaged.
I know out there's going to be questions. So what do I email? Like, what would I use to communicate to my audience? How often should I communicate with my database? What should I say? Do I write an email and say, "Hey, I'm available for voiceover"? What are we talking here?
Well, I think a really great place to start, I look at email marketing. There's a lot to unpackage in what you just said, right, Ann? So each one of those in and of itself could be its own episode, right? And perhaps that is how we need to do this, because there is a lot. And of course, I think I've said this before, and I jokingly but seriously say it again. I'm in marketing, so my answer gets to be, it depends. All the time.
In terms of how often do we communicate with our list, I will say for our, Blast subscribers, we actually have a monthly communication with the list, or our clients have monthly communication. And I think in the grand scheme of things, communicating with your list once a month is really not spammy at all. It's not a whole lot. You hope that it leads to top of mind, people remembering who you are and what you have to offer. A lot of times I'll be explaining that once a month is really nothing. Like when I think of my subscription to, Old Navy or something like that, I'll get emails every other day from them. And,
Right.
how much is too much? And especially for our industry, how much is too much for us to be communicating? I'll have somebody send me an email, and it only takes one email with the wrong verbiage or just the wrong attitude that'll just set me off. And I'll be like, that's it, unsubscribe, boom. Done.
Yeah. Well, and what you're talking about, too, with like an example of Old Navy or retail or real consumer, more spontaneous driven purchase, right?
Yep.
Getting more of those emails we tend to accept that, right? Because even though, as we talked earlier, the customer journey, those stages are still happening. They're just happening kind of lightning fast, right? We all of a sudden click on the link. We're like, ooh, cute jeans. And then the next thing we know,
and then we're on a
putting
list.
it in the shopping cart and, so...
Oh, yeah,
Yes.
after we buy, and then we're on a list.
And this is actually something interesting to pay attention to. Retail, anything really customer-centric is going to, that B2C model, business to consumer model, is going to provide email in a very different way.
Oh, great point.
Yeah, I mean, as in voiceover, we are actually marketing ourselves to other business people.
Right.
This is why that persona work was so critical when we talked about it, right? Really understanding your business person is going to help you decide that cadence of how much or what they're interested in. What I like to remind folks is email it's not just a tactic, right? It's another content marketing opportunity. It really is. The email is just a distribution of your content. That's all it is. And so you have to think of what you put in that email as another way to put content in front of your audience. Now, sometimes it might be promotional, like you mentioned, right, Anne?
Yep.
Sometimes it might be informative. Sometimes it might be just for entertainment, whatever that case is. But it's about being very intentional about what you want to send and knowing your audience, how they want to receive information, how often. Those things start to come from data, right? When we talk about the click-through rates and the open rates and things like that, which I think we're going to spend an entire episode just around some of the ways to stay on top of your data around this. But if you don't really know your audience, you're just kind of being treated by a retail brand, which is very different, if that makes sense.
Well, I think when you put forth the vehicle for having people sign up, you have a decent idea as to why they joined because you've put something out, hopefully, of value to them. And so they're interested in that. So you have a great place to start from when you're trying to figure out, well, what am I going to put in that email? In my website, when I post a blog, it automatically sends email to anybody who has signed up to my list. And so knowing this, I produce the content on my blog, knowing who it's going to, and it will send the email out automatically. And that in and of itself is not a direct sales sort of thing to my list.
Right.
It's just, hey, here I am. Here's some information that you might find interesting. And oh, yeah, by the way, we all know that Anne Ganguzza does voiceover or Anne Ganguzza coaches or whatever it is.
It's a classic content marketing play.
Right.
It's basically marketing with your content through the power of this is part of the awareness, right? Awareness of information. When you have a problem, you want to make sure that you can provide information, education, best practices, just good stuff, right? And that's why blog posts can be really powerful for that kind of thing. But another thing that you're doing, Anne, that I just want to touch on is the segmentation. So you've segmented this part of the database into an area called blog subscribers, right?
Correct.
Now, that's going to be a catch-all of perhaps multiple personas, but you know that they're interested because they provided that either email, subscription process to you. I'm interested in staying on top of Anne's blog.
Exactly.
Right?
That's a different subscription than, let's say, somebody who signs into my website.
Segmentation, I think, isn't talked enough about in our industry, and there's so much power in that. Here's kind of that rhetorical question. What would it mean to your audience to segment all of your, e-learning titles and then segment all of your agent titles and segment all of your production house titles, right? Something as an example. And then be able to create 3 different messages in your newsletter process or your promotional send process, right?
Yeah.
It's really about taking that extra effort to really treat your database like the multiple audiences it really is, but give each segment the love that they should be receiving, right?
Absolutely. And that, like I said, it only takes one email that's off, that's not necessarily caring about me as a person or why would you send me an email about skincare when I was nowhere near that website? Or why would you send me an email about SEO services when I don't even know who you are? That kind of thing. So, yeah, if you're sending the wrong message to the wrong list or segment, right, it can be really off-putting, and it can really, I think, impact your bottom line and your potential clients.
Absolutely. And it's kind of forgetting that our intent sometimes is to really put the right information in front of the right person. So even in our world, an example is let's say you have a medical narration company or production house or even just instructional designer that you're working with or you've worked with them in the past. You just add that medical instructional designer to your commercial list, or, they're now getting your commercial demo or your political demo. If for them, it's just not the same. They may not unsubscribe, but it doesn't make sense. It's kind of off the mark. And when you talk about, all the emails we receive, what if, and this is a big what if every single email we received actually was somewhat personalized and had valuable information that we were interested in? Like, think about that.
Absolutely.
How many times do you go through, I do this on my phone, I start going, it's good, delete. Like I just start, but I don't want to unsubscribe because I might get something, right?
Exactly.
Like, what a horrible reason to stay. Yep. I might get something sometime, someday.
That's the whole process, too. Again, when we're sending out the blasts, we are generating lists that are segmented and targeted toward specific geographical regions with specific genres in place. So for the blast, it wouldn't send out, like you mentioned, wouldn't send out a promo demo to necessarily a commercial list.
Right.
In the same vein, when it comes to marketing yourself in general, when I create demos, I'm creating very target-specific demos to a particular audience. And it works very well in terms of getting, potential clients coming your way because it aligns with what they do on a day-to-day basis. I mean, that is just something that is of interest, and you're not necessarily putting people off by sending them something that they have nothing to do with or have no interest in.
Absolutely. And think about that. You invest that much time and money and resources into creating an amazing demo, and then you just start sending it to everybody. And so,
to the
so
wrong
you go through that
audience.
entire process of being very specific in the delivery and the scripting and all these things. And
Absolutely.
then you aren't doing the same with your promotional piece. And so it's really just the next logical step.
And the next question is going to be, well, how do you segment your list? Is there a software that allows you to do that? And I guess I'm going to say that it depends on the software that you're using. I mean, I believe we had talked in our last episode about different services such as like ActiveCampaign or MailChimp, and they all have their own ways of being able to segment a list. Even if you're creating a database of people that opt in to your website, you can inadvertently through that pop-up window that says subscribe. You can create segmented lists that way. And on the back end of your website, it will keep those segmented. I know that there's a plugin that I used for VioBoss WordPress that allows you to create different lists based upon what page they're on. If they decide they want to opt into this particular content, then that means they're going to be on this list versus another page which might have a different opt-in. And so there are lots of ways to segment your lists. And sometimes, really, it can be your own spreadsheet.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be as simple as that,
Oh,
right?
yes.
Where you have an Excel spreadsheet of particular clients and okay, they are a client that I did an explainer video for, or they are somebody who I did a regional commercial for. So those could be ways that you can segment, even just as simple as a spreadsheet and keeping that extra data or a CRM and then filtering email to those particular lists.
Yes. And I think you touched on something that's really important and we don't always think about because we're busy with our day to day. But whenever you can create a process with the end in mind as you're developing it is going to cause less heartache and headache later down the road. So a great example of that is segmentation. If you have an idea of how you want to segment your list and you set up, to your point, either the opt-in choices based on that, but you're putting thought through that the end result is I want this person to be in the right list segment, then you're going to create content or you're going to be communicating out in a very specific way to attract that, right? So it really goes hand in hand, kind of working with the end in mind. And another piece to that is you will have some folks on your list that will be in more than one segmentation, and that's okay
Right.
too. But I mean, it really forces you to know who's in your database and really stay on top of your database. And this is your lifeblood, so you should be doing that anyway.
And I'm going to recap a little bit about what we talked about when we were building the database, is always remembering to make sure that you give your client the option to opt out of that list. And so that's always super important. And I think, in regards to talking about like how often do I send, or, we talked about segmenting, but now there are different ways to send out your email other than just, click send to a group of people or a list. You can,
Right.
You can have like a monthly, like I have a monthly blog post or a weekly blog post or an email newsletter, right? So if you
Yep.
are putting out that newsletter to your list, make sure that content obviously is something they're interested in. And I would say really important is for consistency. If you're going to do it, make it consistent. And that I think will reap big rewards, consistency in general
Yes.
for, potential clients to buy.
Especially with the digital marketing as it's come up over the past couple of decades, 10, 15 years especially, is consistency will outdo creativity every day of the week. That email newsletter concept is one that most of us can wrap our brains around. I think the challenge some of us have, I know I've had this in the past, is, what am I going to put in it?
Right, yeah.
Well, if you've done some great work on your audience, right, then it's all about them. It's
Right.
not about you. This isn't necessarily an opportunity to just push your promotional stuff, right? Of course, you're going to have a call to action somewhere to your website or to,
Right.
where your demos are located. That's fine. But what is it that your audience would find valuable in terms of like a blog article, or maybe you're using some Google alerts or things that can scrape the web for interesting information that they care about, right? And you're sharing it and putting it in front of them.
Yeah. Even entertainment is especially
Absolutely.
during these times where I think we need to have a smile once in a while, or some sort of entertainment can be, marketing without necessarily hard sell in your face marketing. I think that's also important to push out to your list, because I think it's something that as a society we all kind of need that right now.
Well, and let's not forget that that marketing is an emotional reaction,
Yeah,
for the most part, right?
absolutely.
It's very emotional. So how I continue to receive from you and the emotions I get when I think about you is critical. So to your point, if I think, I get funny emails from that person, or they're very heartfelt, or
Yeah.
a combination of some. A lot of this stuff happens subconsciously, but there's a reason that we keep certain people in our database, because we just know we're going to feel a certain way when we open that email.
Yeah, absolutely.
And there is something to be said about that, and that has absolutely nothing to do with a direct sale.
Oh, yeah.
And everything to do with being top of mind.
Yeah, we have some great blast clients that will market without marketing, and one particular instance that I can think of right now is here's my quarantine haircut, and just something as simple as that. And how are you doing? And here's my quarantine haircut. And by the way, at the very end, it's just a link to the website. Keep me in mind for those auditions. And it's
Right.
just a nice way to make that connection and an engagement with your audience without necessarily saying, hey, here's a new demo, stuff like that. But it's not always that.
Right. Good point. Love it.
So there's also something, Pamela, that you can put into place on one of my websites, has the capability to do something called a drip campaign.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about drip campaigns and what they're useful for.
Yeah, drip campaign, something a lot of folks have heard of. They just probably really haven't thought about it. A drip campaign, we've all been recipients of these.
Yes,
Again,
we have.
don't realize that we are. The most common scenario is to opt in through the content process, right? So say I download, there's a checklist out there. I'm like, this is really cool. I'm going to opt in to receive the checklist. Now I'm into the database. And so an example of a very common drip campaign is called a welcome campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And this is when you receive, there could be a series of 2, 3, or 4 emails. This is just an example. I always say the number of emails is dependent on the information that you think is important to your audience at that time. But a welcome email is when you usually usually receive an email shortly after you subscribe that literally says, welcome, right? Mm-hmm. Welcome to my community. And most often the first email explains kind of the rules of the game. And what that means is the person will outline how they're going to communicate. Like, I send a monthly newsletter and I do this and that kind of thing. Kind of just, here's what to expect now that you're here. And another way to kind of keep those conversations going is then to provide additional information or education on the topic or the reason they opt in to begin with. Right? So it's a great way to stay engaged initially, because then people don't get what we sometimes refer to as buyer's remorse, right?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
When you opt in, right? And you're like, and it also allows you to engage with a little more personality and something right away versus waiting for the monthly newsletter, which maybe just went out yesterday and now you got to wait another 30 days, right? So that's kind of I guess, the most common drip campaign that we see or that we've been participants of.
Yep.
And then, of course, there's just simply the idea of what I like to call the lead nurture campaign. And this is where you're really going to nurture the lead process. And so you might involve a little bit more of some social media. It's multi-channel, right? It can be multi-channel. So you've got some social media elements that drive into your database. And again, you just want to nurture with information and education. You're not trying to sell anything.
Right, absolutely.
But it's about keeping them engaged. And I know we're going to talk about data and stats in a future episode because that's part of what drives the decision, right, Anne, is how you do things today is when you first start is based on a great educated, I call it the educated guess part, right? You do it best you can with what you have when you get started. And then as your data provides information, a story starts to come from there, and you can pivot or you can modify your campaigns because of how the interaction's been taking place for, say, 6 months or 12 months or something like that.
I think it's also a great opportunity to learn more about your audience and also further develop that buyer persona that we spoke about earlier. So I think they all go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Everything, I always say, if you want all of your marketing to improve, you've got to work on the persona.
Yeah,
Once you feel really confident, you know your persona super well inside and out. Here's the thing, folks. As soon as you know the person you're talking to, your marketing becomes more energetic. Like ideas just start popping, right? Like all of a sudden, you're like, I got so much stuff because you understand them.
Yeah. Isn't that just so simple, right? The more you know who you're talking to, the more the conversation flows, right? And
it sounds so simple.
It's so simple. It's so simple, bosses, but we get it. This is not easy stuff. Like Pamela said earlier, if it were easy, we would all be, we would all be like...
We'd be, hitting it out of the park every day.
Exactly.
And I think that's a piece to this as well as, I've been doing this as a practice with a lot of clients over the past few years. But
you do this full time.
I have to know it. That doesn't mean I do it 100%. Like there's a constant learning that has to be a part of this, and you have to embrace. I think I happen to love the art and science of marketing as an industry and topic, which is why I work in it. And I think a lot of us that are in different things, such as voiceover, we look at marketing sometimes as this thing we got to do. Mm-hmm. And I really, really hope that in this series that you realize that marketing, it's not a thing you do. It's part of your business DNA, and it's part of your lifestyle.
It has to
It
be.
just becomes a part of what you need to become as a business owner to really engage with the right audience. And then, of course, get those conversions, just skyrocket them, right, into your bank account.
Good stuff, Pamela. Wow. We could talk all day about this. And I think we will continue the conversation in a future episode. But great stuff. Thanks so much for sharing all of that, Pamela. And bosses out there, keep in mind that, it's not a simple process, but I think if you're dedicated and you're consistent with it, you can really start to see some positive results in your efforts. And so go out there and be email marketing bosses. And I'd like to give a great big shout out to the boss of our communication, and that is IPDTL, which allows Pamela and I to talk to you guys about all of this great stuff. I love IPDTL, and we thank Kevin over there for everything he does in support of this podcast. And if you want to find out more, you can go to ipdtl.com. All right, guys, have a great week, and we'll see you next week.
Bye now.
Bye.
Join us next week for another edition of VO Boss with your host, Ann Ganguzza. And take your business to the next level. Sign up for our mailing list at voboss.com and receive exclusive content, industry revolutionizing tips and strategies, and new ways to rock your business like a boss. Redistribution with permission, coast-to-coast connectivity via IPDTL.